While we're at it, let's put our hands together for the San Francisco Marriott, huh? The marquee here. These guys throwing down this great, fantastic breakfast. And they left 2 little biscottis on my pillow. Thank you very much. That was very nice. I want to introduce our acting mayor right now, sitting at my table, and Supervisor Malia Colen is here. The mayor is Malia Colen, and the mayor is in the PI, you tell me. Drumming up business, no doubt. Malia, why don't you come on up?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ken. Wow, it's good to see you all this morning. Oh, Mayor Brown, good morning. One thing he's taught me is it's not about what you say, but how you say, and timing is everything. But I'm here to introduce a wonderful video message by Mayor Ed Lee. He couldn't be with us today because he's in the Philippines, currying good favor and touring the affected area from Tacloban. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to introduce to you our Mayor, Edwin Lee. Thank you.
Hello, I'm San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee. While I'm unable to attend this year's City Beat Breakfast, I send you greetings to Manila, where I'm working hard to expand business and trade opportunities for the city. But I want to take a moment and share my deep appreciation for the work of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for your partnership in supporting our economic recovery and getting people back to work. As you all know, we're living in an extraordinary time. We see economic recovery all over our great city. And this recovery is driven by innovative companies, our global connections, and a laser focus on making San Francisco a great place to grow a business and invest. In the last 3 years, we've cut our unemployment rate by half, and we have netted more than 42,000 jobs. We're seeing broad-based job growth in every sector of the city's economy, all growing and beating the US growth rate. We're seeing the economic recovery because we've created the conditions that give investors and entrepreneurs confidence in our city. We've reformed our business tax, made San Francisco the innovation capital of the world. But we also know that with growth, sometimes comes growing pains. That's why I'm counting on all of you to help me create an even stronger and more affordable city in the year to come. To do that, we have to focus on the basics. After decades of underbuilding, we're building homes again in San Francisco for all San Franciscans. I've set an aggressive goal of completing 30,000 new and rehabilitated homes by 2020. To achieve this, I've outlined a 7-point housing plan that protects, stabilizes, and grows our housing stock. My plan includes eviction prevention and anti-displacement strategies. It includes stabilizing and protecting at-risk rental units. It includes new rehabilitation and down payment loan programs so that we can create more middle-income homeownership opportunities. And to make our city more affordable for working families, I'm supporting a significant increase to our minimum wage. I know that a few more dollars an hour can make a big difference to working families, and it can also boost our economy and drive consumer spending. And although crime is down in our city, we must continue to focus on pedestrian safety and make our roads safe for everyone. We will make improvements to Muni and support our transportation projects. We will do this so we can continue to create jobs, provide a reliable, safe, and affordable transportation network for our workforce. We will work together to support our young people. Together, we helped more than 6,800 young people find jobs this past summer through Summer Jobs Plus. And we'll continue to work together to strengthen our neighborhoods through the Invest in Neighborhoods initiative. We'll provide loans and grants to small businesses, fill vacancies, and help strengthen our merchant corridors. I believe that by working together, we can continue to achieve great things. I look forward to continue our work to make the Year of the Horse a successful year for our city. Now, congratulations to the Chamber's 2014 Board Chair, Peter Grubly, And thank you, all of you, for attending this morning.
Thank you, Mayor Lee, and thank you, Supervisor Cohen. And on with the show, huh? Now to discuss the issue ranked as the #1 issue of concern in the 2014 Dignity Health City Beat poll. I want to welcome our workforce housing panel of experts. I'll be up here, led by the longtime industry leader, executive director of San Francisco's Housing Action Coalition, Tim Colen. And please join me on stage, gentlemen. We'll get this thing going. I'm bringing up Sean Kieghran, Oz Erickson, and John Ram. Take it away.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Bob, for the opportunity to speak, and good morning. I'm Tim Colen, and for the last 8 years, I've run the 14-year-old nonprofit called the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Our sometimes foolhardy mission is to advocate for building well-designed, well-located housing at all levels of affordability. We believe that San Francisco should sharply increase its housing production rate for all housing, especially for the middle income, our most endangered population. It continues to surprise me how controversial this message is sometimes. There will be people walking around with index cards. Send in a question, they'll come up here and we'll have time at the end to take some questions from you. So, it's not news to you that we're in the middle of a nasty, unprecedented housing crisis. With its undertones of cultural conflict and backlash to the high-tech sector, the topic seems to have caught the interest of the entire country. So there's only going to be one slide, but it's a good one. I got this last week from an article just released by Jed Kalko, the chief economist for Trulia, the online real estate firm. It shows San Francisco in relation to other U.S. tech hubs, the cities we're in some sense competing against. The data might be kind of fine, but on the vertical axis, you can see construction permits per 1,000 units of housing. On the horizontal axis, you can see housing prices, median housing prices per square foot. This mostly normalizes the data, so we're comparing apples to apples. What his disturbing article says is that not only does San Francisco produce the lowest rate of new housing of any U.S. tech hub, but much worse, our production rate is at the extreme low end of the top 100 U.S. cities. For reference, San Francisco's annual housing production rate for the last 2 or 3 decades stands somewhere around 1,500 to 1,600 units per year. By contrast, Seattle, a tech hub to which we're often compared, year in, year out, produces double the amount of housing we do. At some point, we risk choking off the economic boom that has made our city's economy the envy of the country. But before this happens, we will have already emptied the city of our young, the new families, entry-level workers, and the amazing creative class and free thinkers that have justifiably given us our reputation as an extraordinary city. It would be our goal that we could have a quantitative, data-driven discussion around housing, but one of the curious features of this issue is how many folks simply do not accept that San Francisco has a housing market subject to the laws of supply and demand. Among some groups, there's an almost religious conviction that no amount of new housing can have any effect on price, and that our only effective remedies are to ever more tightly regulate the housing market that we do have. A couple of weeks ago, a ballot initiative was put on our June ballot that, in an attempt to restrict height increases, jeopardizes sensible urban infill along our entire eastern waterfront from Fisherman's Wharf to Hunters Point. This would affect current plans for 2,700 new homes, of which 500 would be on-site permanently affordable. The initiative, curiously, does not mention where this housing should be located instead. It would be our view that San Francisco's chief civic problem is that new housing is too frequently seen as something almost bad, which has negative consequences and whose impacts require a wide variety of costly mitigation. As a result, San Francisco has long had in place a variety of rules and processes unique among American cities, which make it time-consuming, arduous, and risky to build new housing. This problem has not escaped the attention of urban economists and planners across the country. If I had one request for you folks, it would be that you tell your elected and civic leaders that it's time to start using the economic evidence plainly in front of us to increase our housing production and to start looking for ways to target it more intelligently to the folks that need it worst, our neglected middle income, the ones that are being priced out. We need a new approach that says when proposed new housing that meets all of the various height, design, and affordability rules that we set for it, and it pays all of the enormous fees that we impose on it, it should be permitted as of right and not subjected to a very long series of hoops to jump through. The future character of our city absolutely depends on the outcome of this conversation. So, we're lucky that we have three of the best minds around housing in the city who've agreed to share their insights with you. Sitting closest to me is John Ram, Director of the San Francisco City Planning Department. In the middle, Oz Erickson, Founder and Chairman of the Emerald Fund. And at the end, Sean Kieghran, President of the Residential Builders Association. These are really good guys with deep experience in this topic, but don't take my word for it. Given the red-hot urgency of this topic these days, performing is pretty much all we do, and this breakfast is just another stop on our vaudeville circuit. John's going to sing a song, Oz has a tap dance routine, and Sean's going to end with a terrific juggling act. So let's get started. Don't forget to send in questions, and they'll come up to the panel. So, I guess I'm mic'd. We can get going. John.
Tim.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What is it that these good people here at this hour of the morning need to know about the planning department, what you're doing, the state of the city, and how we get out of this pickle we're in?
Well, I think, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. This is an issue that is becoming more acute in a very short period of time, but is an issue that has been brewing in this city for a very long time. So I would just say a couple things. One is in my mind, and there are minds that disagree about this perhaps, there are three issues that are driving the current housing demand. One is clearly the baby boom generation. We are all retiring and moving back to cities. The second, as the mayor mentioned, is the job growth in the city, 40,000 jobs in the last 3 years. And the third is, I think, a fundamental shift in the American attitudes about cities, and that is that the millennial generation is moving into cities. In fact, the most important factor that you can think about when, with regard to that fact is that the average mileage that Americans have been driving has been dropping since 2006, since before the recession. People are moving back to cities, and that's a fundamental shift in how we're thinking about our cities. And that's happening in all of the cities, especially those coastal cities that are urban, walkable places like San Francisco. Tim mentioned the laws of supply and demand. There are very smart minds in this city, as Tim said, who don't believe that the supply side means anything in San Francisco, that the supply is so strong that we could build 10,000, 20,000 units a year and it would not matter. I happen to disagree with that. I think that supply does matter. I do think, however, and as the mayor has pointed this out, that it's a supply problem that has been going on for 20 to 30 years. The problem that we have today has been created by 20 years of underbuilding. The issue in Seattle, as Tim mentioned, where I spent 9 years, is that they build twice as many units as we do every year in a city that's about, about 20% smaller. So I think there's a very pertinent question here about the housing we build today isn't going to make a difference necessarily, but the housing we will build over the next 20 years will make a difference. And I think that's where we have to focus our efforts, is a long-term strategy to increase the supply. From my end, and I will give you this factoid that many of you have heard, because of our codes, because of our processes, because of our environmental reviews, we are required as a planning agency to do detailed reviews on more projects than any city in the US. So we review in a detailed way about 2,000 projects of all types a year. New York, at 10 times the population and 8 times the land area, reviews about 500 projects a year. And that's not because we build more, because we clearly don't. It's because we are required by our processes and our procedures to review in a detailed way 2,000 projects a year, some of which are quite small, some of which are quite large. That contributes to the time it takes to approve projects, it contributes to the permitting, and it contributes to the cost. This is not a panacea for solving middle-income housing, but it certainly is a factor when it comes into factoring in and understanding the full cost of housing in the city.
Thank you. Oz, we all know how expensive housing is in San Francisco. You built something like 2,500 homes in this town. Why don't you just build affordable housing, Oz?
Yeah.
The real problem with housing in San Francisco right now is the actual out-of-pocket cost to build a unit. You know, we're in the middle of doing 1,000 units right now. We're looking at a new project starting construction in a couple of years. We're looking at out-of-pocket costs for a 120-foot tall building of $650,000 per unit. That's our cost. Now just think about that, guys, for a second. What does that mean in terms of the rents that you have to get to just pay for it, just paying for it, at providing some return for the equity and some basic debt returns? You need about a 6% yield on that cost. How does that translate into rents? If you're going to set aside 12% of the units for affordable units, you need to be getting for a 2-bedroom, just purely without making any significant profit at all, you need to be getting $5,600 per unit. You need to be getting $4,600 for a 1-bedroom. It's really, really, really difficult. And people look at the provision of affordable housing as, I don't think they truly understand the economics. It costs you around $13,000 a year just in operating costs and taxes to run a big building. That's your out-of-pocket variable costs, your utilities, your water, your power, your security. Guess what the rent? Let's see, who knows? 55% of median. What's the rent for a 2-bedroom affordable at 55% of median? Can anybody guess? Anybody know? It's $1,200 per month. So basically, you are providing a $650,000 unit for absolutely free today. That's what the economics worth. Now, what's the solution to this? Somehow, those costs have to be paid for. Now, the only good solution that I can think of is one that relates to John and the City Fathers. Think about this, guys. Say you have a building that's zoned for a 40-foot height. That land trades for 40 feet. It costs certain amounts per dollars and the construction costs. If you go from 40 to 65, you can add 3 more floors of units. Who owns those air rights? The city owns those air rights. The people own those air rights. The marginal cost, and I'm not talking about taking the whole building and making it 30%. I'm saying the marginal cost of allowing the zoning to change to go up those 3 stories, you can take 30% of those new units and make them affordable. The city owns the air rights. Now, John just has to get it through all the neighborhoods, but there are huge areas of land, like the Geary Street corridor, and many of the major streets. They can take more density easily, particularly with our rapid transit. And when you do that, and you also just think about this, lots and lots of vacant land in the city that's owned by the city. The city can change the zoning of that land, and as a requirement, they can provide housing for firemen, housing for schools, those sort of. They can actually do this. We looked at doing this about 20 years ago for the school district, where we were going to take a vacant school site. That is essentially, it's not free land, but it's underutilized land, and that can generate housing for the needy. That's the best solution. Otherwise, where the hell is the money going to come from? Because somehow you have to pay for these projects. The money isn't free. It's not like developers can just pay for it without getting debt and without attracting equity. We can't do it. It's not possible, no matter how rich you are. So that's my 2 cents, and John's going to solve it for us.
Sean, good morning. You have here a contrast. You have 2 builders One does a lot of the higher size, a lot of the cranes you see, 100 Van Ness, very tall, and Emerald Fund does a lot of the type 1. Sean, with the RBA, does a lot of the lower scale, cheaper to build, hopefully, housing. And so, Sean, my question for you is that San Francisco needs a whole lot more smaller scale, lower cost of production housing, especially out in the neighborhoods. What's preventing the RBA from building it?
I think to answer that, you have to understand who our members are. Our members are primarily immigrants. To do a deal, most of the time, families will pool their sources together. The down payments come from their life savings here in America, their family savings. In too many cases, it's their college education fund, it's their retirement accounts. To compound the risk, the loans for these projects have to be personally guaranteed. So it's not just the keys to your 6 or 10 or 20 unit building that you're sacrificing. You're potentially giving up your home and your partner's homes as well. In order for this to justify the risk, certainly we need to have a stable housing market and something that we can rely upon. And I think we have that now. But more important, we need a stable planning approval process. And when our members go through this process and they're subjected to new historical hiccups and environmental hiccups and things get delayed and 1 year becomes a year and a half and a year and a half becomes 2 years, it's just not worth the risk anymore, and that's a lot of the reason why you don't see a lot of these housing units being built in the neighborhoods. And if I could follow up on Oz's question for 1 second, there is no such thing as affordable housing. There is no such thing. The same concrete, the same sheetrock, and the same steel beam produces all sorts of housing. It's only affordable to the end user, and I really think we need to change this wording because it perceives, the general public feels that we can produce it somehow inexpensively. It doesn't happen. It costs almost as much and practically the same of value to produce market rate housing as it does affordable housing. And that's a big problem for our industry.
Thanks. I figured I'd give these guys a shot at playing housing czar for about 10 minutes or something like that. With the powers vested in me, I'm going to appoint them housing czar. John, let it rip. Here's something that, let it rip. I live in the Richmond. There's not a building over 3 stories. What can be done to increase density? It sure would help grow small businesses on Clement Street. Mr. Housing Czar, what do you say?
I think Oz is partially correct in his assessment that buildings that are currently 2 and 3, zoned for 2 and 3 stories, could increase height, and then we could increase affordability levels, increase middle income levels. What I have been baffled by ever since I've been here is that many of those streets are in fact today zoned at 4 and 5 stories, or at least portions of them are. And there's virtually no construction happening on those streets, none. In fact, I can't think of one project we have in the office that's proposed for Gary Boulevard. So the question is, why isn't that happening when I'm told repeatedly that height is the most economical to build as wood frame construction? So why isn't it happening in the places that could go for it, that could accommodate it, I should say, under current zoning? That's one question that I've never been able to answer, and why people won't build in those areas. The second is that I do think there are strategic places we should be looking at for upzoning for the very reasons that Oz mentioned, though. I mean, I think there's value in that to the neighborhoods and attracting neighborhood services. There's value in increasing densities in parts of the city where the land costs are less expensive, and therefore units could come in presumably cheaper. And I do think that we should be looking strategically at those very corridors to do that.
Housing Commissar Erickson.
Okay.
Hold on a second here. I want to get you on the spot here. Would all new housing include provisions for low-income housing? Should all housing that's built by the market sector include inclusionary? And what is the role of inclusionary housing, which is, if you don't know, is the affordable housing set-aside that the city has? What's the role, Oz?
Actually, I'm a big believer in inclusionary housing, and I was, along with about 10 other people, I saw Steve Vettel here, There were about 10 of us who sat for 9 months in Mark Leno's committee coming up with the affordable housing. We spent every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, for 9 months coming up with the first formal. So I'm a big believer in affordable housing. However, you add too much affordable housing to a project, you can easily drive the land costs below zero, the land value below zero. If you're being required to sell something that costs you $650 for $200,000, on the order of at 50% of medium or something like that, if you're doing extras, you can drive the land cost below zero from a value. But I wanted to answer something else, which is zoning. How many people have been in the marina? Everybody's been in the marina, haven't they? The marina is one of the nicest places in the city. And what's the design of the marina? The design is a big building on a corner, little buildings in the middle, a big building on the corner, little buildings in the middle. That's the whole marina. They're 6-story buildings. They're all over the place. Now, there are lots of neighborhoods, and you're not going to get shot by the neighborhoods. There are lots of neighborhoods like the Western Addition where you could easily do that. You could change the zoning, and then on the upscale above it, you can provide the more affordable housing. So that was. If I were czar, that's what I would do. I can just see it in Pacific Heights. That's a joke.
Just kidding, okay? Sean, here's your chance.
I've
never
dreamed
going
of
to
this
get a
day
better
all my
one.
life.
What solutions articulated by housing advocates are most helpful to the RBA?
I need the fun question. I want to be housing czar for the day. Okay. As housing czar, the first thing I would do is Malia, close your ears. I take the power away from the Board of Supervisors.
Can you hear in the back?
That's the last project Sherlin ever does.
Elected officials need to listen to their constituents. Constituents generally have short-term visions in mind. They want to protect views. They want to protect their density. They don't view housing in terms of decades. And if we're going to get real about our housing policies, if we're going to create long-term solutions, we need people who are accountable for the long haul. And elected officials, especially at the supervisor level, doesn't look at things at the long haul. There was a time when the mayor was solely accountable. He had all 7 appointments to the Planning Commission. And the projects weren't appealed to the Board of Supervisors. But any time it all comes back to the supervisors, we run into problems. And that was the first big thing. I think it was 2004, 2006 that changed. That was a big problem. Second thing I do, any project in the pipeline for more than a year would be subject to a new committee. 2 planning commissioners and the RDT team. They'd get together in a room, and after 1 year, they made a decision, and that decision was binding, it was final. The project sponsor could develop it, the neighbors could develop it, but at least you'd have a starting place, and the ball would move from there.
Here's one that came in. The mayor has said, as you saw a few minutes ago, the mayor has set an aggressive goal of 30,000 new homes over the next 6 years by 2020. Yet job growth in San Francisco is projected to run over the same period 40 to 60,000 new jobs. I don't have the source of that, but how can the mayor's even so-called aggressive plan be sufficient to what we're facing? John.
Well, I mean, just to answer that question directly, it's 40,000 new jobs in the city. Our typical ratio is about 2 people per household. So if you figure, and even if every single one of those jobs were people living in the city, you'd need about the 30,000 that the mayor is talking about. But I think more importantly than that is the kind of ratio in the city between jobs and housing, right? And I mean, that's really what we have to be looking at. Reduces transportation costs, you put housing near transit where it makes sense. It really is about the ratio, and the city, until the last 3 years, has actually had essentially no net new job growth for over 40 years.
Yeah.
If you actually look at the jobs that were gained downtown and in the medical centers and in the universities, they are offset by the job losses in the industrial areas, the shipyard, and so on over the years. So it's only been the last 3 years that we have seen over almost a 40-year period a net new increase in job growth. And that's very important for us to think about, because the vast majority of the regional job growth has been, of course, in the Silicon Valley. That's starting to change as well as those jobs shift north. But you have to look at the ratio, the number of people per household, and all that sort of thing when you actually look at that balance between housing and jobs.
Here's something that comes up in our world a lot as we hear the question asked, well, we need family housing. San Francisco, I believe, has the lowest proportion of children under 18 of any major city in the United States. This is a need right now for San Francisco, is more family housing, and yet we come up against the question of how we define housing, which is, in San Francisco, is pretty unusual. And I wanted to ask the two developers, how do you define family housing? What is the answer to this? Where's your market? What is the best product for you to build? Oz.
Everybody thinks of family housing as 3-bedroom units. And, part of the problem is that there really are so few children in San Francisco. It's actually, we did a project, Portside, Bridgeview. We did it with 3-bedroom units, a lot of 3-bedroom units. They were the last units sold. And I don't think anybody moved in there with a child out of all the 3 bedrooms. So it's very difficult to actually build 3-bedroom units given that sort of face of demand. You have to prove to the banks and to your investors that your product is going to work. It's either going to rent up or sell. And 3 bedrooms are really tough. Right now we do roughly 40% 2 bedrooms, 30% 1 bedrooms, and 20% studios. And that mix, now you vary that depending on the times, but that's a mix that actually works. And maybe you'll do 10% 3 bedrooms, but they're a risk.
Sean, what's the product that's in your sweet spot?
A real tight 2-bedroom, 2-bath, or a large 1-bedroom. But getting back to the family housing has to be looked at in a larger picture. And the traditional family house is 2, 3 bedrooms. It's in the neighborhood. It has the rear yard. It has a deck. It has so many other things, the garage, that people want. What family can go out and afford for the very first time a 1,300 square foot product that you and I is going to bring to market? It's very difficult. Housing is done in steps. You buy your first condo, it might be a studio. You gain some equity, you trade up, you buy a second place. Then maybe you meet someone and you get serious and you're ready to start the family. Each of you sells your product, and then you can move to the neighborhood and buy that house that you're really looking for. It's very difficult for us to provide everything to everybody. We can't build affordable, we can't build entry level and housing. It just does not equate, it's impossible.
Here's one that captures the sort of zeitgeist of our time as we're facing these very stark competing demands. I want more affordable housing, but I'm also concerned about congestion. What is our current population, and what do you consider maximum capacity? We don't want to become Manhattan after all. John, that's why you're up here, huh?
The question of maximum capacity that question has been asked in every city that I've worked in or visited over the last 30 years, right? How big can we be? New York is now at its record population of 8.3 or 8.4 million. I think we are at around 825 to 830,000 is the current projection. We are currently growing at the current pace of about 10,000 people a year. We are admittedly the second densest city in the US, but we also have a tremendous amount of underdeveloped land, in my opinion. The issue with capacity really does relate to the infrastructure, particularly transportation. There's no question that those two things have to go hand in hand. I'm very gratified that the Mayor's Task Force put together this proposal to finally fund MTA and Muni at a reasonable rate this year. I think that makes a huge difference. But it also is about making sense of how we develop, putting jobs and housing closer together, lessening the impact on transportation systems, including the roadway. We are not going to grow at all if we depend on cars. I'm sorry, that's just the fact. It isn't going to happen. And we just have to get real about that. And we have to rely on public transportation, walking and biking as the alternatives to driving everywhere. It's the only way it's going to happen.
Let me just say one thing to support what John's saying. In the old days, 10 years ago, you would never build a condominium project unless you had one-to-one parking. I'd never done it.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can certainly get away with 0.5 per unit or even 0.25 per unit because of transportation. And I think I actually am a huge supporter of Mayor Lee's the transportation bond as well. That is going to, enormously help the housing situation in San Francisco.
Sean, any density limits that affect you?
Density scares all the neighborhoods. But rephrase it a different way. Ask them, do they like walkability? Ask them, do they like ground floor retail? Ask them would they like more coffee shops, more laundromats, more stores of convenience, and they say yes. Ask them, do they like to meet people walking down the streets? Would they like more vitality on the streets? And they say yes. So I think we need to do a better job explaining to people that there's, yeah, you can go as far as Manhattan, or you can go, there's lots of different steps in between, and people like those things.
I just want to follow, I think we have to be clear about something. This region is going to grow by about 1.5 million people over the next 20 years. And the city is projected to grow by about 200,000 people over the next 20 years. That is about 15%, rough numbers, of regional growth. That growth in the region is going to happen whether we plan for it or not, or whether we have the infrastructure or not. It is going to happen. So it behooves all of us to plan for it in a way that makes sense for the city and this region. And that's really what we have to be about. It is not a question of whether this region is going to grow. It absolutely has. There's not any doubt that it's going to happen. And we have to accommodate it.
We've gotten 3 or 4 questions about the political climate of the city and the post-8 Washington landscape, and with this waterfront ballot initiative that's coming. And I've seen 3 or 4 questions that are saying, you know, what can we do? What's going on here? I would turn it around and throw it back at you. What can you do? It will depend largely the future of implementing the things that you're hearing being discussed up here. It will depend on you getting to your elected and civic leaders and saying, we need a new direction, that the city is right now at a crossroads. Either we can continue on a path that's going to be very, very exclusive and a much less diverse city, or we can come together and start figuring out solutions that are going to build more housing, in particular for the middle income. It's something that we do a terrible job at in San Francisco. One of the secrets, maybe not widely appreciated, is San Francisco does a terrific job of building housing at very low and low income levels. We're an example to many cities around the nation. There's a huge gap between that and what we see as market rate housing right now. So any last comments here? Then on behalf of these 3 housing mafia pirates, I want to thank the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to talk to you guys
Come to
today.
the 151S at 10 o'clock. Your office. Come here, he's slamming. Tim, take care. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Tim, John, Sean, Oz. Discussion absolutely timely. Let's hear it for these gentlemen. A rare opportunity to hear their point of view on this